How are we doing, folks? So I get the pre-lunchtime slot. Everyone's waiting to get out the door and get fed. Well, no, there's another speaker coming after me. Exactly. Sorry, but it's. I'm sure we're going to start thinking about our stomachs if you're like me. Just a quick one. I was on a challenge there on the weekend where I had to run from Marley Park over the Wicklow Way to Carlow over 2 days. So just looking at B12 there, it sounds a bit like a vitamin supplement, but no, it's part of the building regs. So without further ado, B12, what it says is that sufficient information, I know it's been mentioned by a couple of speakers earlier, but sufficient information on the active fire safety systems installed for the purposes of fire safety in the building shall be provided to the building owners so that the building can be operated in order to protect the health and safety of the building occupants. So it's making sure that the information is handed over to the building owner so that they're not asking questions 5 years down the road. What do I do with my smoke curtain that's no longer operating correctly? Or how do I maintain my sprinkler system if I've got a glycol mix system? What's the mix? Now, they should, of course, have specialists involved in the maintaining, but they need to be told how often it needs to be maintained as well. They need to be getting that information clearly and concisely. Now, from my perspective, looking at it from the Assigned Certifier side of things, we've seen that BCAR has a lot of information that is being collected through the construction works and prior to the construction works and at completion stage. And we feel that this should be leveraged where appropriate to feed into B12. Okay, so B12 aims to ensure that the adequate information is provided upon completion and to ensure the building can be effectively managed having regard to its design. So it needs to know what the design was in the first place and what is the as-built design versus the commencement design. Has things changed? Is it as per the fire cert, or has there been modifications that wouldn't be material alterations requiring a fire cert? Where are they captured? Are they sufficiently communicated to the building owner and their maintenance team? How complicated is the building? Is it a complex building or is it a simple building? What are the consequences if it was to fail? Needs to be taken into consideration in the information that's provided. Sources of information, we look at the critical documents required to achieve BCAR. So ancillary certification, commissioning documents, which gives flow rates, all the various information. Like we've got an exemplar document that has somewhere between 250 to 300 documents that are required to be provided prior to the certification by the assigned certifier at the end of the project. Of those, there's going to be a portion of them that sit into the category that need to be included in B12, and we need to identify what they are. And I say we, it's a team effort, so it's not the assigned certifier's job to communicate the B12 information onto the client. It needs to be understood that that's a team effort. We will provide the information that we have available, but other team members, we're not going to be able to tell you how to maintain a sprinkler system, and it's not our role to do that. So that needs to come from the specialist side of the table. The M&E consultants need to validate that the information that has been provided for the specialist systems is appropriate and reasonable for the works that have been handed over. Look at the safety file. So safety files and O&M manuals. We're seeing a lot of these elements are getting more digitized. Does that mean you have to go fully away from paper? You don't have to, but it's probably advisable, I would say. It does seem to be where the future is going. The design team information. So what is the final issue set for the design and what are the changes? Have they been accurately updated? I know that some design team members aren't always that quick to want to reissue their final issue design set if there's changes from an as-built perspective. I would be of the opinion that they should, but there's always a bit of a tug of war on that one, in my experience. The build team information, so there's a good chunk of information is going to come from the build team as part of B12. They have built the building. They have the specialists and the subcontractors that have designed and in some cases designed and installed the systems or just installed the systems, but they need to have all of that information collated in a digestible format for the client. There's no point in giving them information that's not going to be possible for them to digest. Of course, they will have maintenance teams, but depending on the scale of your building, I suppose it can range across the spectrum from a sophisticated client demand to a relatively agricultural understanding of what's required in the building. So you need to pitch the information at the audience it's intended for. Okay. So in terms of the building regulations B12, this is what it says under point 09. The regulation B12 requires that the building owner is provided with the information so that the building can be operated in a way that it protects the health and safety of its occupants. It says on the completion of the works that the owner of the building or the person who commissions the works should be provided with sufficient information. So that's a subjective statement, sufficient. Who determines what's sufficient? Sufficient information about the active systems installed for the purposes of fire safety and their maintenance requirements, so the building can operate as intended and designed in the event of fire. Such active systems may include fire detection alarm systems, emergency lighting systems, sprinkler systems, smoke control systems, etc., and any device activated by such systems. So they're really highlighting the active systems which come from the M&E side of the fence. I would say there's possibly some passive systems also need to be categorized in there as well, like you have your fire safety certificate that's being granted and approved. You need to know how is that being achieved and how is that going to be maintained into the future of the building, particularly if there's more complex systems that are doing that. Owners must be provided with a suitable set of operating and maintenance instructions to allow for the effective use and the operation of the critical systems. So it's no point in saying, there's your O&M manual, Mr. Owner, and you've given the minimum information that you could possibly get away with, and in 10 years' time, because the information wasn't sufficient, that the building hasn't been appropriately maintained, and then a fatality occurs. That's really the downside of what could happen if this isn't followed through on. And that's the reason that it was introduced. Having sat in on the panel for the advice on Part B, it did seem clear that this was something that was missing from the previous versions of Part B. Although it was happening in some cases, it wasn't happening consistently, probably is the best way to put it. In the UK, they have something called the golden thread. So we're seeing that BCAR plus B12 is pretty much equal to what they're calling the golden thread in the UK post-Grenfell. BCAR introduced a formal process of building control and certification of compliance, which is subject to regulatory assessment and so on. But the amount of certification, like, it's all well and good to have a cert, but it's not sufficient. You need to ensure that it can be managed for the lifespan of the building. That building, is the lifespan of 50 years? Is it 30 years? How long will the sprinkler system last in its current format? Does the pipework need to be replaced after a 30-year or 50-year period? All that information should be included in what's passed through from a B12 perspective. Like, we've done upgrades of projects where you've gone in and you've looked at the likes of the sprinkler system and it's falling apart, to be honest. Like, you'd wonder, would it have operated as intended if it was actually in a fire scenario in basement car parks on high-rise buildings? Like, it does make you ask the question. Anyhow, so a robust process needs to be followed to capture the numerous strands and the evidence required to demonstrate compliance. And this information that we've captured throughout the building works can be leveraged for the purposes of B12. When we look at the 5 rocks that we use from a BCAR certification perspective, we generally are looking at the inspection plan, benchmarking first of a kind, so what was acceptable for a fire door, what's acceptable for a fire damper, the first one, so that all the rest of them that go in are correct and right, and that everyone knows what the conditions of acceptance are from the design team and the certification team's perspective. IFCOs is an acronym that we coined, which is issues for closeout from a BCAR perspective, and BCAR queries. But really, we're interested in critical documents for the most part from a B12 perspective. So we're not really looking for inspection plan, benchmark, IFCOs and queries to be handed over, but we are looking for the appropriate element of the critical documents. So of that 250 to 300 documents, what are those items going to show up in the safety file that goes through from a B12 perspective to make sure that it is being operated and maintained correctly? So I was talking about whether it can be a hard copy or soft copy. We're definitely in the soft copy camp. I suppose we have a part of Catalyst has a system called OBI, which allows us to manage the compliance documentation from a BCAR perspective. Can also be used for O&M manual safety files, CDMs. So what we've seen though is that it provides a system similar to the BCMS system for managing the information as it flows through, and it allows that information to be available to the building owner for the lifespan of the building. So the documentation that's required to support ancillary certificates and demonstrate compliance includes additional certificates, testing, commissioning, checks and warranties, and all the other paraphernalia and confirmations that are required to actually sign that cert. We look at the contractors and the subcontractors. They have to provide their documentation to say that they've met the applicable standards and the norms. We capture the compliance critical documents on OBI, which is basically an online dashboard or upload system like the BCMS. But we look at the likes of the subcontractors and the specialists, like they're providing confirmation letters to the fire engineers to say that it has been installed as per the fire test report, or that it's been in compliance with the fire safety certificate. The products and material certificates, the FPCs, the DOPs, the CE mark and all that good stuff. Site lab performance tests, testing logs, fire test reports, all of that good stuff. Down here, the fire safety management plan. So I think we got mentioned BS 9991 and whether you need to have a fire safety management plan and a designated person for managing that fire safety management plan. It'll be interesting to see whether that it becomes more prevalent, I suppose, in the new Part B. It's not explicitly required. It is explicitly required in BS 9991. The fire alarm cause and effect matrix, like that, the final issue that I've been on projects where that's got to Rev 15 or whatever it might be. They've made so many changes all the way through. You need to make sure that the final issue of that cause and effect document is in the hands of the building owner and the person or the people or the organisation that's going to come in and maintain their fire safety systems, in particular their fire alarm systems, because there's third-party interfaces that will need to be ongoing checked. And if they don't have the right version of that document, that building is not going to operate as intended for the life of the building. It's absolutely imperative that this final version gets checked on an ongoing basis to make sure that the system is working. So we put up our documents, be it an ancillary cert for structural or whatever it might be. It gets submitted by the build team or the relevant party, and then it's generally reviewed by the primary design team member or the assigned certifier, depending on what the design responsibility matrix calls up. This all backs in then to the annex of supporting documents at completion, which is a statutory upload document, or it supports the statutory documents at completion stage. So when we click generate, all the 250 documents pop into a spreadsheet and are available to be relied upon for the certification. Now, when we look at the BCAR document review process, this should be probably mimicked, I would say, for B12, but you've got your uploader, which is the party responsible for the efficacy of the information. You've got the reviewer who's going to validate it. Usually it's a lead reviewer on the primary design team member. We can have secondary reviewers in the assigned certifier also review it. So we have oversight of the 250 documents. I won't have looked at every single one of those 250 documents. I do have to trust that the design team, when they've been advised of the format and the requirements, will be able to understand what's necessary there. But I will look at specific ones, in particular the facade one comes to mind. Need to have a competent BCAR coordinator and document controller, and that's also going to be important in the B12 process as well on the build side. So if they're just putting it as an admin function to say, okay, to collect up all those documents, lash them into the folder over there, and that's your job done, that's not going to be sufficient, and it's not going to be acceptable, and there's going to be errors. It needs to be somebody that knows what they're doing and knows how the building works. So having a BCAR coordinator and a document controller from a BCAR certification perspective is a great advantage, but I think we should also be looking at it from a B12 perspective, that document controller has some technical background and understands what they're doing and what they're pulling together. We need to agree up front what will represent acceptable certificates. So this is one that I had a chat with Ronan there. I believe the MBCO do field some questions on this, so I said I'd dig into it a little bit. So a schedule of critical documents should be collated as an early deliverable so everyone understands what they're going to be asked to sign. Is it an AD, an AC, an AI, the engineer suite, the architect suite, the building surveyor suite, or the specialist suite? Now, there's been a bit of a tug of war, I suppose, in the construction industry between what the design team want and what the build team are willing to give. And what the practice note 2 says is that if you're doing installation and design works, a CIFO1 or a CIFO2 or a CSS cert is the appropriate cert. But I think that practice note 2 came out after the initial BCAR was rolled out, and design teams had already formed the perspective that they wanted to see the S-suite cert, which is a specialist suite of certs coming from specialist designers like sprinkler contractors or facade specialist consultants. And I've seen projects held up on which one of these will or won't be provided, which is why I'm saying it needs to be upfront agreed as early as possible. And if you ring up Ronan and ask them which cert it is, or Richard, they're going to probably say it's not their job to tell you. Okay, so it's up to the design teams to agree what format they will accept, but it's up to the build team to also. So I'm also aware that CIF have issued a 25 to 30-page document which advises their members only to provide this particular suite of certs, the construction suite, the CS certs. If they are providing this cert, we, Catalyst, probably the largest assigned certifier in the country, we don't have a problem accepting these once it's clearly set out what they're doing. So we've taken legal advice on it. Once they have it, design, fabrication, installation, commissioning of, for example, the sprinkler system, putting in the explicit information that they receive from the design team and the build team, including ideally the fire certs and the DACs where appropriate, probably not the DAC for the sprinkler system, but and then the design that they've carried out needs to be put into the second schedule, or they can append a register to it, okay? But we also then look for a cover letter to confirm that the other items that are on these certs are captured, which is that they have appropriate PI insurance in place and that they've carried out the detailed design for the system that they're taking responsibility for. Usually that squares the circle on the projects that we're involved in. In some cases, some design teams still insist on this as well as these, and I have seen it delay projects getting handed over, so it's something that I said I give a little bit of time to here. The code of practice says this is the right one for design and installation subcontractors, but the design teams had got into the habit of asking for these ones, and that habit is seeming to be one that they want to continue with. I know that civil structural engineers and precast specialists are having a tug of war, and I know that architects and various specialists are also, particularly architects, carrying out the design certifier role, and the assigned certifier role are also looking for this suite. So it's just one to be aware of in the industry, and I would be saying follow the practice notes, but however, that's the best we can give for that. So we'll move on to the next one. The key statutory and ancillary documents. So at commencement stage, statutory forms need to be signed. We talked about the commencement notice and the 7-day notice. So I know Honor mentioned the 7-day notice, and she didn't get into the wording, and particularly working in Dublin, in the Dublin jurisdictions, let's say, they're pretty particular that your 7-day notice wording and your 7-day commencement wording matches. And if it doesn't, it will get boomerang back to you, and you'll have to do it again if you're doing the 7-day commencement notice. So that's something to be aware of. You get your certs at commencement stage saying that the design at commencement is compliant, but then a lot of changes may or may not happen, or you also need to schedule out the works that haven't been designed prior to commencement, and you need to capture them at the completion stage or as they go through, and ideally getting them certified as they're being completed, or validated that they're compliant as they're being completed. In terms of the ongoing construction works, we've got our inspection plan, our inspections, pre-pour checks, cube logs, DFT readings, so dry film thickness readings for inchmessen paint. If somebody's painting a steel beam with a particular DFT reading, they need to make sure that they are getting that logged and collected, because downstream, if somebody needs to upgrade or maintain that system, they need to know what that is. That's information that needs to go through to the building owner. Also talk about installation checks and design team checks. So that's a copy of the certs that are signed at the end, the Part A and the Part B. My experience is that builders are quite quick to sign the Part B cert, okay? Assigned certifiers are not very quick to sign the Part A cert unless they have all the information that backs into it, okay? Because ultimately, it's our name that's gone down as a professional, albeit professional indemnity insurance backing into a company is usually what stands behind that. But it's your credentials that are on the line, and you need to take that seriously. So, and we do. So critical documents, I didn't put all 250 line items on this sheet because we wouldn't be here till the end of the day. But we've gone for some of the key ones here that we collect as the assigned certifier as part of the process. And we asked the various consultants to confirm if they need any additional ones. So final issue design, from an M&E architectural, fire, civil structural, facade perspective, in particular the facade, like we talk about post-Grenfell, how do they maintain the facade, and where are the cavity barriers located, what is the makeup of it. The M&E systems are particular ones that have been drilled into in B12 as critical safety systems. Material data sheets, global test reports, key technical information and submittals, they all need to be available, because how are they going to maintain it if they don't have that information? Specialist subcontractor and builder provide this information, and then the respective consultant accepts it. We talked about the cause and effect. The IS 3218 and 3217, I know that it's going to go into, John's going to go through 3217 later on, but is there any exceptions to those certs? If there are, they need to be listed on the cert, and they need to be clearly agreed with the designer of the system and the certifier of the system and the assigned certifier. So sprinkler systems, are they going in as per the fire cert? Are they going in without deviations or variations? If there are variations or deviations, are they explicitly listed on the cert? And is it clear to the various parties what areas are required to be sprinklered to meet the requirements of the building regulations along with the fire safety certificate? Fire rated ducting, dampers, if they're fire dampers, are they normally open or normally closed? Some more complicated systems have normally closed dampers that need to open. That all needs to be captured in the cause and effect. It needs to be obvious to the building owner when they manage the system how they're going to actually maintain the system and check it on an ongoing basis. Also, can they actually get at those dampers? Like, I generally make the mechanical subcontractor go to the worst dampers in the place and show me that they can physically put their hand in without getting sliced by the duct, because they've usually chopped it with a snips. And then if they can't, they have to move it. And they don't like that, I'll be honest. They do not like that. But it's better to say it up front that that's going to happen, so it's not a surprise. The lifts, so there was some discussion about fighting lifts and evacuation lifts. They, EN 81 and 8120, like, lifts need to be maintained to the top level, particularly if they're firefighting lifts or evacuation lifts. Disabled refuges, AOVs, suppression systems, all need to be maintained. So we talk about passive and active evidence, Part B compliance, compliance statements, fire stopping photographic logs. Like, if you go into a building and you don't have the photographic log for the fire stopping and it's been changed 3 or 4 times, you don't actually know who owns the responsibility of that, of the most recent fire stopping. Fire safety certificate submissions, all of them, not just the last one, but make it clear which ones actually apply now. Like, if a client, I've got projects with 9 fire certs on it, and a building owner that's going to manage the building into the future, is it clear which fire cert now applies to their building for the areas? And I'm not sure that that's always the case, to be honest. As-built information, that's a key one now, because things move. And if you're going about the final issue design and it hasn't been updated to an as-built design, they're not going to be able to find the equipment that they're meant to maintain. So, and this should be getting validated by the M&E consultants to make sure that it is actually accurate. I know that they don't necessarily agree with me on that one, but I do think they should be, it should be insisted upon to make sure that the as-builts are accurate, or at least sanity checked. Fire for specialist elements, structural facades, DB ratings and lux ratings, so you can measure how your system is performing against what it previously said it was going to do. So you need to be doing your audibility checks and your lux checks on an ongoing basis. All the ancillary certs for all of these, I'm not going to go through them individually. System information, Part F, L and M compliances as well. Okay, so here we have an overlap between BCAR and B12. Over here we have the benchmarks, inspection reports, closeout info, section 11 closeout queries and collation of docs. In here we have the overlap, which is the certs, the tech subs, the FSCs, DAX, BER, Part L, fire test reports, designs, recce certs, lux levels, DBs, planning, DRM. That's not an exhaustive list. Over here we have our maintenance protocols, fire safety strategy for the life of the building, as-built drawings, preventative maintenance schedules, and spare parts and procurement details. And again, that was my crack at it. I'm sure I've missed some, and there's sure to be more depending on how complex your building is, but you need to give it consideration